Listen up, because things just took a wild turn outside Annie Guthrie's place. 3 sheriff's deputies just wrapped up a massive 3-hour raid right here. Armed with forensic gear, they scoured the interior while camera flashes constantly lit up multiple rooms through the glass. The intense photography started in the garage before moving deep inside the residence during that entire 3-hour sweep. One official emerged sporting blue latex gloves, completely tight-lipped, initially leaving us guessing about their exact agency. However, those exit glimpses of jacket patches absolutely confirmed they were local county sheriffs. The weirdest part is that Annie and her husband seem to have vanished from the property, and even Savannah has completely vacated the premises. Why on earth would authorities randomly swoop in to shoot crime scene photos a full 7 days into this nightmare? Detectives slipped silently out of Annie and Tommaso Cioni's residence, clutching sealed evidence, ignoring questions, and offering absolutely zero answers. After speeding off into the dark, they mysteriously returned days later for round 2, hinting at a massive FBI trap closing in on that specific location. As for why a seemingly normal vehicle was locked down in police custody for over 40 days, that dark secret is finally unraveling right now. Exclusive enclaves like the Catalina foothills tend to magnetize a very specific breed of fiercely strong women. These are resilient survivors who have conquered profound heartbreak and successfully pushed their kids entirely out of the nest. Operating strictly by her own rules, 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie perfectly embodied this lifestyle after losing her spouse back in 1988. Her fierce autonomy wasn't born out of mere desire, but forged through absolute survival and unwavering grit. Following Charles's tragic passing when little Savannah was just 16, Nancy proudly single-handedly raised her 3 kids under that roof. Savannah eventually blossomed into a national NBC icon, while accomplished author Annie settled down nearby with Tommaso Cioni and their boy Elmo. With Cameron establishing roots in Vermont, Nancy anchored herself in the family's Tucson estate, rigidly adhering to a daily routine her loved ones memorize. Sunday services and occasional family feasts dictated her rhythm, always ensuring she was safely indoors before nightfall without ever getting behind the wheel. Never one to roam, she relied on a mandatory smartphone application that constantly beamed her pacemaker's vital rhythms straight to her cardiology team. Skipping her crucial daily cardiac pills wasn't a minor slip-up. Her doctors had warned her it would trigger a lethal emergency, a fact she fully understood. That disciplined lifestyle held strong until the evening of Saturday, January 31st, 2026, when she caught a rideshare for the quick 4-mile trip to Annie's local home. Touching down exactly at 5:32 in the evening, digital logs confirmed she enjoyed a lovely meal and game night with her daughter and son-in-law. It felt like a completely forgettable, mundane weekend gathering, but a dark twist was quietly looming out of sight. Tommaso chauffeured her back in their blue Honda CR-V later that night, idling in the driveway until the garage bay eventually lifted at 9:48 p.m. The barrier shut by 9:50, with Sheriff Chris Nanos officially verifying that the son-in-law stayed put until she was securely indoors. Within those fleeting 2 minutes of mechanical movement, Tommaso headed home, leaving the elderly matriarch entirely by herself. The impending nightmare sprouted directly from that brief drop-off, kicking off at 1:47 a.m. when her main entrance camera, mysteriously lost connection. By 2:12, an alternate security lens flagged suspicious activity lurking right outside the front boundary. While that video proved completely useless, the digital tether to her life-saving heart device suddenly flatlined at exactly 2:28 a.m. With the implant severing its Bluetooth tie, detectives swiftly pinpointed this exact digital blackout as the precise instant she was kidnapped. A highly calculated 41 minutes elapsed between the lens dying and the medical tracker fading, proving this was a masterfully orchestrated ambush. Panic set in the next day when relatives rushed over because she completely missed her virtual Sunday worship broadcast. They found the rear entrances swung wide apart, a chilling scene Savannah famously recounted during her debut broadcast interview. Relatives immediately suspected a severe health crisis and assumed first responders had blasted through the residence earlier. Frantic hospital checks yielded nothing, while her smartphone handbag, smart timepiece, and crucial prescriptions sat perfectly untouched on the kitchen island. Abandoning those vital pills was an absolute death sentence, and discovering her DNA-matched blood pooled on the entryway sealed the horrific truth of her disappearance. Standard police work typically starts at the epicenter of the violence and slowly radiates outward until a solid suspect is trapped in the net. Detectives initially followed that exact playbook here, scouring the widow's property and deploying tracking dogs across the surrounding grounds. After extracting video feeds from the entire neighborhood block, the squad suddenly pivoted and drove 4 miles away. They weren't chasing a rogue fugitive or serving a random raid, but rather marching straight toward the residence of the victim's own flesh and blood. Authorities essentially invaded the home of the very child who hosted that final dinner, conducting a grueling 3-hour search in full protective gear. Fast forward to February 7th, 2026, task force members breached Annie and Tommaso's threshold, keeping their secretive 3-hour mission hidden behind brief bursts of light. High-intensity crime scene strobes pulsed rhythmically against the glass, an undeniable signature of professional evidence mapping. This was calculated preservation, and ex-federal operative Tracy Walder later confirmed to People magazine that the departing crew was hauling specialized processing kits. Grasping designated brown collection sacks designed specifically to block contamination, Walder's final verdict was chillingly clear: those weren't leftover groceries. Transparent plastic pouches packed with potential clues marched straight out of Annie's residence, gripped tightly by officers sporting standard medical gloves. Those crucial items vanished inside a police cruiser, swallowed entirely by a secretive legal tracking process that authorities remain completely silent about today. Reporters at NBC verified that this inspection happened voluntarily, as both homeowners gladly opened their doors for detectives rather than demanding a judge's order. Countless internet sleuths and media talking heads have leaned heavily on this specific detail to convince the masses that the pair remains entirely clear of suspicion. Let us tear that assumption apart right now, considering the comprehensive reality of what that voluntary sweep uncovered and what it ultimately missed. The underlying reasons behind detectives knocking on that door again paint a drastically different picture than those comforting public statements suggest. Stop right there and listen closely. Anyone tracking this mystery who completely missed the fact that authorities combed through that specific residence 2 separate times. Drop a quick thought in the comments section, since that follow-up inspection accidentally exposed a major clue the team never intended to broadcast. Exactly 5 days following that initial evidence sweep, law enforcement returned on day 12, offering absolutely zero explanations, public statements, or scheduled media updates. Detectives showed up, stepped indoors, and promptly departed. Local journalists aggressively tracking this saga verified this subsequent inspection at the Guthrie residence happened through voluntary permission once again. When journalists demanded answers regarding this follow-up sweep, the Pima County Sheriff remained completely silent, bringing us to a brutally honest, investigative truth. Law enforcement professionals absolutely never re-examine a previously cleared scene unless they are facing one of 2 highly specific scenarios. Either their preliminary sweep unearthed something dragging the investigative crosshairs right back to that exact doorstep. This implies those initial plastic pouches collected on day 7 forced a mandatory follow-up to confirm theories, or detectives completely overlooked a critical element during round 1 that fresh intelligence suddenly deemed absolutely essential to review. Both possibilities carry massive weight in a mystery this complex, while the exact chronological placement of that return trip ultimately ties the entire narrative together. On February 11th, just 24 hours prior to that second raid, FBI Director Kash Patel dropped the initial security clip featuring our disguised perpetrator, finally showing the entire nation the individual suspected of kidnapping Nancy. The Phantom glided through the shot, displaying chilling composure before lifting his covered fingers directly toward the lens. Snatching nearby plant life to obscure the viewpoint, this intruder showed zero panic and absolutely no sense of urgency. Pinpointing the surveillance device flawlessly, he navigated those blind spots like a seasoned pro who had clearly executed similar operations before, and by sunrise, authorities were knocking on Annie and Tommaso's door again. During that identical time frame, a Tucson broadcast partner for CNN obtained another extortion letter packed tightly with highly classified details that ordinary citizens could not possibly have known. These were incredibly guarded facts capable of instantly shrinking the suspect pool, prompting journalists to immediately hand the disturbing document over to federal agents. Over the subsequent 48 hours, detectives flooded that specific street, once more interrogating locals and seeking answers that remain completely absent from the public case files today. 3 major events collided in quick succession. Authorities broadcasted the video a secretive extortion letter emerged, and cops raided that residence for round 2. This timeline isn't a coincidence, as seasoned agents never act without purpose. Every single footstep in federal kidnapping inquiries requires a specific catalyst. Whether following a fresh tip or pulling a newly discovered thread, those breadcrumbs pointed straight to the Guthrie property twice in a row, making the specific items police decided to confiscate incredibly telling. They refused to toss it or hand it back simply because maintaining possession during a federal probe guarantees the testing phase continues. Laboratory reports remain incomplete, and the evidentiary pipeline stays fully active. The Pima County Sheriff locked down the blue Honda CR-V belonging to Annie and Tommaso for more than 40 grueling days. Tommaso navigated this exact automobile on the evening of January 31st, making it the final known transport that safely carried Nancy away from her last voluntary destination. That specific ride parked outside her home at 9:48 that night, before departing at 9:50, marking a crucial 2-minute gap representing the final moments of normalcy before cops seized it without uttering a single word. Fast forward to February 27th, exactly 26 days post-vanishing, when an investigative reporter from CBS 5 Arizona marched right into the local sheriff's headquarters, demanding answers regarding that impounded ride. Authorities offered a brief reply, indicating the car remained an active puzzle piece, completely shutting down assumptions about wrapping up Forget about getting the keys back anytime soon, as the probe remained incredibly active through March 11th, marking 40 consecutive days of police custody for a standard forensic sweep in a heavily funded federal operation. Swabbing cabins for genetics, vacuuming stray hairs, spraying chemical reagents for invisible bloodstains, lifting prints and downloading navigation history should consume mere days at a top-tier facility, meaning a 40-day delay signals something entirely different. Perhaps initial laboratory hits demanded extensive comparison against unrelated materials currently undergoing evaluation elsewhere. Maybe technicians stumbled upon an anomaly that launched a completely fresh avenue of inquiry, or perhaps this SUV tied into a much larger evidentiary web that remained unresolved elsewhere. Former federal operative Jennifer Coffin Daffer tackled this exact automotive mystery head-on through a March 1st broadcast on her channel, laying out an incredibly precise legal perspective. She emphasized how police leaned exclusively on voluntary cooperation for every property search, completely bypassing warrants. Bypassing reasonable suspicion strongly implies detectives never viewed the homeowners as primary suspects, since federal guidelines demand securing a judge's signature when hard proof actually exists. You never rely on polite requests because defense attorneys love destroying voluntary agreements by alleging police coercion. To her trained eye, lacking judicial paperwork practically confirmed zero direct accusations existed. However, the veteran pushed her analysis far deeper than mainstream pundits ever dared. She floated a wildly different automotive theory that completely recontextualizes that agonizing 40-day confiscation period, explicitly asking if somebody utilized that exact Honda to secretly monitor Nancy's daily commute. Could a rogue actor have slapped a covert GPS bug onto the undercarriage, potentially tampering with the crossover while it sat completely unguarded in that residential driveway? The goal wasn't framing the homeowners, but rather keeping a digital eye on the target who routinely rode shotgun inside that very cabin. That presents a completely fascinating angle, perfectly aligning with why laboratory technicians would demand an uninterrupted 40-day window to meticulously dissect the vehicle's electronic architecture. Authorities ultimately handed the keys back without uttering a single syllable regarding their potential discoveries, though that deafening lack of transparency actually speaks volumes all by itself. Detectives hauled evidence out of Annie's place on 2 separate occasions, while that vehicle sat locked in a police lot for 40 straight days. Yet cops relentlessly targeted Annie and Tommaso's block, ignoring the actual victim's house 4 miles away. By February 10th, CNN reported that deputies were aggressively pounding on doors across the blocks surrounding the Guthrie residence. Officers desperately pleaded with homeowners to hand over private camera recordings and submit to immediate interviews. This wasn't some routine pass, as several squads spent weeks swarming the block, creating such a massive spectacle that locals gossiped and reporters started tracking the chaos. But the truly bizarre part of this entire neighborhood sweep was exactly what the police wanted to know. Detectives skipped the standard routine, entirely ignoring typical inquiries about weird cars circling the block or shady strangers loitering by the local mailboxes. According to reporters interviewing the locals, the interrogations focused intensely and exclusively on the couple themselves, zeroing right in on Annie's exact habits. They dug deep into Tommaso, questioning their personal vibes, prying into their romance, and demanding to know if anyone had spotted red flags over the past few months. Looking back at February 1st, that detail hits incredibly hard since authorities kept hammering the exact same streets and the exact same houses. They relentlessly asked about the exact same duo living in the very home that crime scene techs had already tossed twice. When detectives repeatedly grill bystanders in one specific perimeter, they are applying a calculated tactical strategy. This is not random curiosity, but deliberate triangulation. Cops only return when their puzzle has missing pieces, convinced that the folks living nearby are secretly holding the crucial fragments. Digging into someone's personality establishes a baseline for their actions, while tracking their routines helps detectives hunt down one specific critical event. They are hunting for a brief encounter or a casual glance that a local brushed off as meaningless, though those exact testimonies remain completely sealed. The public got absolutely zero briefings regarding the results of those interrogations. Yet a massive federal probe backed by the FBI and local detectives rarely wastes time. Cops never return to the exact same block 6, 8, or 10 times for absolutely nothing. They keep knocking because a massive red flag keeps pointing them there, so send this breakdown to any true crime addict following the case. Honestly, the next phase reveals a hidden angle that the mainstream media completely failed to link with the impounded ride and those intense residential raids. Midway through the manhunt, Sheriff Chris Nano sat down with CBS News and casually dropped a massive bombshell, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of his own words. He openly revealed exactly how much access the Guthries actually surrendered to the police, stating bluntly that his officers did way more than just ask questions. The chief admitted they confiscated vehicles, raided homes, and seized mobile devices, claiming the department didn't even have to forcefully take it. He stressed that the family willingly handed everything over, though he admitted the cops still dragged them through absolute hell. Hearing a top cop say they dragged them through hell proves this was way beyond a standard friendly witness chat. You don't use that kind of extreme language for someone who just signs a quick statement and casually tosses over an unlocked cell phone. That heavy rhetoric implies detectives relentlessly squeezed every single drop of data from those individuals during an incredibly grueling and exhausting marathon interrogation. It indicates an incredibly deep, invasive probe that undoubtedly leaves massive psychological scars tearing through automobiles. Residences and electronics were freely handed over during an ongoing manhunt that just hit week 9, a fact verified straight from the boss. Happening at the exact same time as the family sweep was a deeply hidden secondary probe that the media almost entirely ignored. CBS News officially verified that a federal agent walked into a Tucson firearms dealer and slapped a stack of highly sensitive pictures right down on the counter. Those physical photos clearly displayed distinct faces with matching names, prompting the Fed to demand purchase logs spanning the entire last 12 months. Authorities legally sealed the identities shown to that clerk, which is insane to think about since the FBI was actively hunting for specific buyers right inside the city limits. During that identical timeframe, crime lab technicians were ripping through the relative's house and tearing apart their primary ride for trace evidence. Security cameras caught the attacker packing a holstered pistol, a setup that veteran cops immediately flagged as horribly sloppy and indicative of a total amateur. Detectives were hunting down weapon receipts linked to clear mugshots right in the exact town where the final witnesses to see Nancy alive actually resided. Nobody knows exactly what those background checks turned up, and the clerk's visual identification remains a total secret, yet the actual operation absolutely happened. Law enforcement verified the timeline targeting specific Tucson locals, while simultaneously raiding properties, yet nobody in charge has ever bothered to explain that crazy coincidence. All of these wild maneuvers assumed the cops were purely trying to piece together the chaos from the night of January 31st, leading into the dark hours of February 1st. However, the task force was secretly tracing a sinister plot that kicked off way earlier. When the terrifying reality of that hidden timeline finally dropped, it completely flipped. The investigation revealing the attacker lurked outside her house 3 full weeks prior. On January 11th, 2026, that same masked intruder, or someone wearing an identical outfit, trespassed directly onto the property. He didn't bring his bag this time, ditching his heavy tactical gear, so he could merely scout the perimeter. This was a pure scouting mission identical to the calculated dry runs hitmen performed to map out their target's layout before pulling off the flawless strike. The public was never meant to hear about this dry run, as detectives intentionally buried the terrifying truth. During a live kidnapping hunt, keeping the stalker's earlier movements totally classified is crucial because blinding the criminal to the cop's strategy forces the suspect into making fatal paranoid mistakes. Detectives buried that double visit detail like a radioactive secret, knowing it held the golden ticket to the stalker's intel network, and they needed to hunt him in total silence. Then the FBI director blew the doors off by blasting that January 11th photo online, utterly blinding the ground crew and vaporizing their tactical edge in a flash. Desperate for answers, the victim's family begged Tucson residents to scrub their security cameras, diaries, and digital records for any clues tied to 3 crucial days. January 11th, January 31st, and dawn on February 1st marked a massive shift, stretching the suspect's timeline from a single chaotic night into 3 calculated weeks. Cops are absolutely convinced someone in that neighborhood unknowingly watched the whole prelude unfold right in front of them on January 11th. A local resident actually tipped off reporters about a highly suspicious guy lurking around her property right around that specific time frame. He wore basic street clothes and a pulled-down cap creeping toward the property while scoping out the entire block during a terrifying dry run. After vanishing into thin air for 3 weeks, he returned to execute a flawless 41-minute strike, moving with the deadly confidence of a phantom who had mentally rehearsed the kill 100 times. That intense 3-week staking operation raises one massive, terrifying red flag. Who tipped this monster off about her private itinerary and solitary evening? Who exactly knew she would be dropped off at 9:50 that night, completely isolated and utterly vulnerable until the sun came up on Sunday? The attacker definitely had the inside scoop, scheduling his midnight ambush to guarantee absolute silence and endless hours of uninterrupted darkness. He hijacked exactly 41 minutes, exploiting a perfect gap in time that he knew inside and out. And if you are new here, check out the full playlist below. Binge it from the top, because that January 11th prowl flips the entire narrative, especially while Tucson detectives were busy knocking on doors and searching the grid. A covert high-tech war was quietly brewing in isolated labs, completely immune to the frantic media circus, loud public outrage, and flashy reward money. This biological puzzle is insanely complex, meaning the lack of handcuffs does not scream a dead end, but rather highlights a painfully slow, impossible-to-rush scientific breakdown that detectives are heavily relying on. Take the gruesome porch blood, which DNA undeniably matched to the victim. However, cops claim that horrific crimson trail stretched all of the way from her front door down to the very edge of the pavement. You simply do not leave a horrific mess like that from a minor stumble. That is the unmistakable signature of a bleeding victim being dragged away and thrown into a waiting getaway ride. Detectives also bagged a tangled genetic cocktail at the scene, merging multiple identities into one messy sample that makes pulling a clear database hit an absolute nightmare. A dark glove dumped roughly 2 miles away yielded fresh genetic material for the National Crime Database, but that system completely struck out on finding a match. Police eventually tied that discarded glove to a random food service employee, hitting a total brick wall before sending other collected handwear off for deeper testing. Private Florida techs are still ripping apart clues from the perimeter, pivoting that messy biological puzzle toward the cutting-edge realm of ancestral genetic tracking. This is the exact same DNA wizardry that snagged the Golden State Killer after 40 years and cornered the prime suspect in the Idaho College massacre within mere months. The media totally fails to highlight the massive game-changing difference between traditional federal swabbing and this deep-dive ancestral science. Traditional databases are utterly useless unless your bad guy already has a rap sheet with a qualifying prior conviction sitting right there in the system. First-time offenders ghost the standard system entirely, whereas the new ancestral science does not care about your criminal history. It only needs one single distant relative, like a nosy aunt, or a bored cousin who casually mailed off a fun heritage kit 3 years ago, to suddenly and completely blow the suspect's cover. Since millions of Americans casually spit into tubes for fun, snagging a distant blood relation is wildly more probable than landing a random blind hit in federal files. After locking onto a bloodline, agents aggressively map out the entire family tree, hunting down every breathing relative who fits the killer's age and location profile. They burn through alibis and cross-reference clues until that web shrinks down to one target. This grueling gauntlet easily eats up months of legwork since cops must scrutinize every single distant cousin, but make no mistake, the brilliant lab is humming and the genealogical net is tightening. Hidden on one of those digital branches sits the very phantom who stalked her steps on January 11th and brutally marked her for death. Smash the like button if you know. Deep down, that hardcore science will eventually blow this mystery wide open. Hitting subscribe means joining an army of truth seekers ready to witness the exact moment these bastards finally face justice. Exactly 8 weeks into this living nightmare, the victim's daughter faced the morning cameras alongside her co-host, desperately trying to articulate the sheer hell her family had endured from behind closed doors. She repeatedly broke down on air, confessing the suffocating pain of waking up in pitch blackness and obsessively visualizing the absolute unadulterated terror her mom experienced. Torn between stepping back under the studio lights and completely collapsing, she confessed that her relatives remain entirely trapped in limbo, utterly unable to grieve without a shred of concrete, absolute closure to process. Trapped in endless torment, she fiercely defended her immediate relatives on live television the second the host brought up those vicious, swirling internet rumors. She fired back at the toxic gossip, describing the wild accusations as a soul-crushing weight that simply defies all logic. But her rawest admission laid bare the brutal psychological toll this manhunt had dragged her loved ones through, exposing a truth deeper than any simple alibi. The devastating fallout utterly shattered her closest siblings and relatives, specifically the people who acted as daily caretakers to ensure the matriarch could comfortably thrive inside the house she deeply cherished. These were not shady suspects dodging the cops. They were fully cooperative allies, practically handing agents the keys to their cars, homes, and personal data. They literally weathered this nightmare just 4 miles from ground zero, while a child watched it all unfold, painting a vivid picture of total transparency and profound closeness that aligns flawlessly with every single detail buried inside the official police files. These fiercely loyal inner circle members held the master keys to her daily routine and stand as the very last souls to ever see her breathing. Federal agents and local authorities ruthlessly grilled every single one of them, perfectly backing up the anchor's narrative rather than poking holes in it. Competent detectives will always kick off a major manhunt by fiercely investigating the victim's closest inner circle. They aren't targets. They're the ultimate goldmine of secrets. Imagine the hidden truths unearthed during those dual property raids or the clues extracted from 40 agonizing days of vehicle forensics. Picture the silent whispers gathered from nearby residents or the chilling evidence exposed by those firearm shop snapshots. Think about the digital breadcrumbs pulled from cracked smartphones and personal gadgets. Not a single detail has reached the public eye. Exonerating her relatives wasn't the finale of this manhunt. Detectives simply soaked up their willing assistants, weaponized that data, and relentlessly pushed forward. Law enforcement officially ruled out Annie and Tommaso as hands-on perpetrators. That is a documented, undisputed fact written in stone. Yet detectives dedicated 3 intense hours across 2 distinct visits to that property, seizing a vehicle for well over a month while relentlessly grilling locals regarding that exact duo's daily habits. That specific residence remains firmly entangled in the ongoing mystery. The physical clues ripped from its walls are currently sitting inside a testing facility, quietly holding answers the world is desperate to hear. Flash forward to March 24th, 2026. Day 52 of the desperate hunt for Nancy Guthrie, when the Puma County Board of Supervisors forced Sheriff Chris Nanos to deliver sworn testimony, bypassing standard protocol entirely. Sworn to tell the absolute truth, this unprecedented move was sparked by a series of explosive leaks that had been making the rounds for several weeks. Documents surfaced exposing past workplace misconduct, along with glaring lies spotted within the very resume Nanos used to secure his current high-ranking badge. Meanwhile, an angry public petition to strip him of his title was catching serious fire. This isn't just background noise, it severely impacts the very foundation of this entire detective operation. The top cop spearheading a massive federal kidnapping operation must suddenly fight for his own career survival, under sworn testimony, battling his superiors right, as the desperate search for Nancy Guthrie hits its most critical boiling point. Whenever a premier law enforcement squad wrestles with massive internal scandals, right in the middle of a sensational missing persons hunt, the entire atmosphere mutates, though the raw facts stay identical. Proof remains solid, yet the crucial exchange of intelligence across different bureaus. And between the precinct and civilians gets suffocated by political stress that a healthy, functional task force would never have to endure. Erase the internet rumors, ditch the wild conspiracy theories, ignore the anonymous whispers, and silence the biased podcasters. Here is exactly what the verified timeline proves. An intruder possessing incredibly intimate details about Nancy Guthrie's routines and home layout scouted her territory on January 11th, a full 3 weeks before executing the actual kidnapping. The predator circled back on February 1st, armed to the teeth. He brought a facial covering hand protection, a rucksack, a weapon rig, and a deliberate strategy to blind the security lens. That monster dominated the crime scene for 41 terrifying minutes. Although he avoided an instant database hit, he scattered complex genetic material, demanding intense ancestral tracing, while carelessly tossing a hand warmer 2 miles down the road that belonged to a totally innocent bystander. Navigating the pitch-black residence with chilling ease, the phantom stalker moved like a man who had obsessively rehearsed every single footstep long before turning his grim fantasy into reality. Authorities raided the residence of the final individuals to witness Nancy breathing, not once but twice. They hijacked their automobile for 40 solid days, tossing the keys back without uttering a single word of justification. Local residents endured relentless door knocks from cops facing an absolute barrage of highly targeted questions aimed straight at that specific couple. Both cellular devices were confiscated immediately. Even the lead detective openly admitted that extracting their full compliance was an absolutely brutal, exhausting process. A federal operative marched straight into a local Tucson firearms dealer, flashing pictures of specific targets while demanding transaction records from cards from the previous 12 months. One burning puzzle ties this entire web together: the twin property raids, the 40-day vehicle impound, the neighborhood interrogations, and the weapon shop visit all revolve around one terrifying concept: inside information. Who gave this attacker such flawless insight into Nancy's daily rhythms, allowing him to execute a 41-minute extraction and melt into the shadows before sunrise? What tipped him off to the perfect time frame? How on earth could he guarantee she'd be completely isolated inside her home at exactly 9:50 that night, with 0 visitors expected until daybreak? Who told him exactly which security monitor to steal and where to grab local foliage to blind the remaining optics? Somebody fed him those details. Detectives are ruthlessly hunting down the source of that intel, and they absolutely will succeed. The breakthrough won't sprout from a flashy media briefing, a shiny bounty flyer, or some wild internet conspiracy board. Justice will echo from a sterile testing room born from a digital bloodline, constructed branch by microscopic branch, dropping a bombshell revelation on a random morning that alters the entire trajectory of this case. Nancy Guthrie was an 84-year-old grandmother, ripped off her own property, wearing sleepwear, lacking footwear, missing vital prescriptions, and fading into the night, completely unnoticed. Daylight broke with her vanished, and her ringing cell phone met only dead silence. That woman has earned the truth. And this massive manhunt, despite being fractured, highly stressed, and painfully exposed, is sprinting full speed toward a resolution. By the time you watch this broadcast, Nancy Guthrie has been vanished for 59 agonizing days. The dragnet remains intensely hot, and the scientists are grinding away around the clock. Handcuffs haven't clicked yet, and law enforcement hasn't officially painted a target on anybody's back. However, do not dare call this a dead end. This is a pure science battle, and forensics shatter the mystery at their own pace, entirely deaf to media demands. Should you possess a single clue odd memory, or a stray video clip from January 11th, January 31st, or the pre-dawn darkness of February 1st, 2026, dial the bureau at 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can stay nameless, and the family's staggering $1 million bounty is still sitting on the table for her safe return. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell right now. I am tracking every microscopic shift in this thriller the exact second it drops. We won't stop breathing down their necks until justice is served. Dive into the complete Nancy Guthrie catalog down in the description, where we've meticulously stacked every single clue theory and timeline shift since the very beginning. Share this massive archive with anyone who needs to grasp the sheer gravity of this nightmare. Tell them to hit play on episode 1, because the dark secrets locked behind those Tucson walls are far from finished screaming their truth. This story reminds us of a truth many people forget until it is too late. The elderly do not only need medicine routines and technology, they need protection, presence, and sincere human care. A long life filled with strength and sacrifice should never end in fear, silence, or abandonment. When an older person has spent decades loving a family, raising children, and carrying pain with courage, that life deserves deep respect and constant attention. There is also a powerful lesson here for every family and community. We cannot assume that everything is fine just because someone looks independent. Vulnerability can hide behind dignity. A missed call, a broken routine, or an unusual silence may be more than a small concern. It may be a cry for help that no one heard in time. Most importantly, this story teaches us that love must be active. Real love checks in. Real love notices. Real love protects. Society is judged not by how loudly it speaks about family values, but by how faithfully it cares for its weakest members. Let this be a wake-up call. Cherish your loved ones, guard the elderly, and never treat a human life as ordinary, because every life is sacred and every moment of care can matter forever.